It's 3 AM, the hour when secrets refuse to stay buried. These aren't just stories, they're archived truths. Welcome to the 3 AM archive files.
1. The truck camper who wasn't alone. In April of 2020, a teenager named Noah decided to do something that, on the surface, sounded simple, even peaceful. He packed up his truck and drove deep into the forests of Sun River, Oregon, looking for a quiet place to spend the night alone. The kind of place where there are no lights, no people, and no interruptions. Eventually, he found a spot far off the main road, somewhere you wouldn't just stumble across by accident. It felt isolated enough to be safe, or at least that's what he believed at the time. As night settled in, everything was completely still. No cars passing, no voices, just darkness stretching endlessly beyond the trees. At some point during the night, Noah suddenly woke. At first he couldn't figure out why, but then he heard it, a sound just outside his truck. Footsteps, not random movement, not the light, uneven sounds you'd expect from an animal. These were slow, steady, deliberate steps, circling around him. He stayed completely still, trying to listen without making a sound of his own. The footsteps continued for minutes, then longer. At that point, it became impossible to ignore. Someone or something was out there, moving around his truck in the middle of the night, in a place where no one should have been. Trying to document what was happening, Noah grabbed his camera and began recording. His voice, low and tense, revealed just how unsettled he was. He mentioned that whoever was outside had been walking around for nearly 20 minutes already. 20 minutes, just circling. Then things escalated. The footsteps stopped right next to the truck. A moment later, he heard it, a hand pressing against the vehicle. Then another sound, someone trying the door handle. At that point, fear fully set in. Noah realized he wasn't just being watched. Whoever was outside was trying to get in. The person didn't speak, didn't call out, didn't identify themselves in any way. They just kept moving around the truck, touching it, knocking on different parts, even pressing up against the windows as if trying to look inside. At one point, it became clear they were right by the door, possibly peeking in, trying to figure out if anyone was there. Inside, Noah stayed completely silent, barely moving, knowing that any sign of life might change the situation completely. After what felt like an endless stretch of tension, the footsteps finally began to fade. Slowly, carefully, whoever it was walked away, disappearing back into the darkness. But the story didn't end there. When morning came and Noah stepped outside, the evidence was impossible to ignore. Handprints covered the truck, smudges across the windows where someone had tried to look inside. Marks along the handles where they had attempted to open the doors. Even scratches along the sides, like fingers had been dragged across the surface. It wasn't just a random encounter. Someone had been there. Someone had been trying to get inside. And the most unsettling part, Noah never found out who it was. No explanation, no follow-up. Just a single night that left behind more questions than answers. But sometimes, what's waiting out there isn't human at all. 2. Stalked by a predator. Early one morning, a man named Kyle Burgess set out for what was supposed to be a normal jog along a quiet trail in Provo, Utah. It was the kind of routine that felt safe, familiar, almost automatic. The trail was calm, the air was still, and nothing seemed out of place. But that sense of normalcy didn't last long. Up ahead, Kyle noticed something small on the path. At first glance, it didn't seem threatening. It looked like a young animal, maybe even harmless. Curious, he pulled out his phone and started recording, not realizing that this small moment of curiosity would turn into something far more serious. Because what he was looking at wasn't just any animal. It was a cougar cub. And in the wild, that changes everything. Within seconds, the situation shifted. From the side of the trail, the mother appeared, silent, controlled, and immediately focused on him. Her presence was enough to make it clear that he had unknowingly stepped into dangerous territory. What followed wasn't a quick encounter. It was a prolonged, tense standoff that lasted for several minutes. Kyle began backing away slowly, trying to create distance without triggering an attack. His voice was firm but nervous as he attempted to scare the animal off, making himself appear larger, louder, anything that might convince it he wasn't prey. But the cougar didn't leave. Instead, it followed him. Step for step, it stayed with him, closing the distance whenever he slowed down. At times it lunged forward suddenly, stopping just short, almost testing him. Each movement felt calculated, like it was waiting for a mistake. At one point, Kyle briefly turned his head, just for a second, to check his footing as he moved backward. That was all it took. Gogar reacted instantly, rushing forward, cutting the distance down to just a few feet, close enough that there was no doubt if it chose to attack, there would be nothing he could do. But instead of running, he held his ground. Because running would have triggered the animal's instincts. It would have turned him from a threat into prey. So he kept moving slowly, maintaining eye contact, keeping his voice loud despite the fear that was clearly building. Minutes passed like this. A constant push and pull. The cougar advancing, Kyle retreating, neither one breaking the tension. Finally, after what felt like far longer than it actually was, he made a move. He picked up a rock and threw it toward the animal. That was enough. The cougar backed off, retreating into the wilderness, disappearing as quietly as it had appeared, and just like that, it was over. But it left behind a clear reality. Out there, one wrong move, one moment of panic, and the outcome could have been completely different. And sometimes, the danger doesn't come from what you can see clearly, but from what you hear in the distance. 3. The laughter that didn't sound. In February of 2013, several residents in a quiet neighborhood in northern Oregon began reporting something they couldn't explain. It wasn't something they saw, it was something they heard. Late at night, deep in the nearby forest, a sound would echo through the trees. At first it was faint, easy to dismiss, but as more people started noticing it, one detail became impossible to ignore. It sounded like laughter. Not normal laughter, not the kind you'd expect from people talking or joking in the distance. This was different. It was louder, sharper, and carried through the forest in a way that didn't feel natural. Some described it as eerie, almost distorted, like it didn't belong in that environment at all. Eventually, one resident decided to step outside and investigate. Drawn by curiosity and unease, they followed the direction of the sound and began recording. What they captured only made things more confusing. The laughter echoed again and again, bouncing through the trees in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint its exact location. It didn't sound close, but it didn't sound far either. It just existed, surrounding the area. Naturally, people started looking for explanations. Some believed it could have been animals. Foxes, for example, are known to produce sounds that can resemble human-like screams or cries. Coyotes can also create strange, high-pitched noises that echo at night. But those explanations didn't fully match what was being heard because this wasn't just noise, it had rhythm, repetition, almost like something was intentionally making the sound, not just reacting or calling out. Others pointed out that animal noises, even unusual ones, tend to have patterns that are recognizable once you know what to listen for. But in this case, even those familiar with wildlife in the area admitted that the sound didn't quite match anything they had heard before. And that's what made it so unsettling. It wasn't just strange, it was unfamiliar. The recording circulated, and while theories continued to build, no one could confirm exactly what was causing it. No clear source was ever identified. No follow-up explanation ever settled the debate. Eventually, the sound stopped being reported, but that didn't mean they were ever understood. And sometimes, not knowing what you're hearing is far worse than knowing exactly what it is, because at least then, you'd know what you're dealing with. But what happens when you realize something might be watching you instead? 4. The van life encounter that went too far. In February of 2022, a woman named Lisa, who regularly documented her life traveling and living in her van, experienced something that completely broke the sense of freedom she had built around that lifestyle. That night started like any other. She had parked in a quiet location, settled in, and gone to sleep inside her van. Everything was calm, until suddenly in the early hours of the morning she woke up. It was around 4:30 a.m. and the sound that woke her wasn't distant. It was right next to her, close enough that it felt like it came from just inches away. Still half asleep, she froze, trying to process what she had just heard. For a moment there was silence. Then it happened again. Another knock. This time there was no mistaking it. Someone was outside. She called out cautiously, her voice uncertain, asking who was there. No response, just silence. Minutes passed. 15 of them. No movement, no sound, nothing to confirm whether the person had left or was still standing right outside. Eventually the quiet was broken again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling around the van. This time she grabbed her camera. Her voice, now tense and alert, called out again, asking who was there and what they wanted. She made it clear she didn't feel safe. Still, no response. At that point, she carefully moved toward the front of the van and looked out. In the distance, she saw headlights, a vehicle. As soon as she noticed it, the car began to back away and leave the area. For a moment, it seemed like it was over, but it wasn't. A short time later, the footsteps returned. This time, she saw movement. Someone walking nearby, staying just out of clear view. At one point, the figure moved behind a tree, deliberately avoiding being seen. Then, just like before, they made their way back to a car and drove off. That was the second time. And then it happened again. A third return, no knocking this time, just movement around the van. Quiet, controlled, as if they were watching, waiting, deciding. By now a pattern had formed. This wasn't random, this was intentional. Eventually, the person left again, and when morning came, Lisa stepped outside to find clear evidence of what had happened. Footprints surrounded the van, multiple pads, showing just how many times someone had walked around her while she slept. Some believed it was someone trying to steal something, but that explanation didn't sit right, because if that was the case, why come back 3 times? Why stay after knowing someone was inside? Why hide instead of leaving immediately? The behavior suggested something else entirely, something far more unsettling. And the only reason the situation didn't escalate further might have been because the person chose not to. But not every encounter gives you that kind of outcome. When the camera caught what was following him, the plan was straightforward. Record himself riding down part of a trail and pick up the camera on the way past. Nothing unusual, just another moment outdoors. As he rode into frame, everything seemed normal. Until suddenly, he stopped. Not gradually, not casually. He hit the brakes hard, immediately reacting to something that wasn't visible at first. Then he turned around, and that's when it became clear. Behind him, moving along the same trail, was a bear. It hadn't made noise, it hadn't charged, it had simply been following him, close enough to force him to stop. At that point, the situation shifted instantly. This wasn't an encounter at a distance, this was direct, immediate, and unpredictable. Instead of running, he did something critical. He grabbed his bike and positioned it between himself and the animal, using it to make himself appear larger. At the same time, he began making noise, raising his voice, trying to establish dominance without provoking an attack. The bear responded, but not aggressively. Instead, it moved closer, not rushing, not retreating, just advancing slowly, observing. At one point, it approached the camera itself, knocking it over, as if curious about what it was. For several seconds, it lingered there, standing over the fallen device. Biker remained in place, maintaining distance, continuing to make noise, careful not to turn his back, because turning away could change everything. Eventually, after what felt like a prolonged standoff, the bear lost interest. It turned and walked away. Just like that. But the quiet way it had followed him, the lack of warning, the fact that it had been there without him realizing it until the last moment, that's what made the encounter truly unsettling. Because sometimes the danger isn't loud, sometimes it's already behind you before you even notice. 6. The wires that were meant to kill. Over the past several years, reports have surfaced from different parts of the wilderness describing something far more deliberate than an animal encounter. Something planned. Hidden along biking and hiking trails, people began discovering wires stretched between trees. Not randomly placed, not accidental, positioned at exactly the right height to cause maximum harm. For someone riding at speed, especially on a bike or ATV, these wires would be nearly impossible to see in time, and the consequences would be immediate. In some cases, riders only noticed them at the last second. In others, they didn't see them at all until impact. There have been close calls where helmets took the hit instead of something far worse. And that's what makes it so disturbing, because this isn't nature, this isn't chance, this is intent. These wires weren't placed to mark trails or hang equipment. They were set at head level, directly across paths where people were known to travel. Anyone riding through would have no reason to expect something like that, which raises a question that doesn't have a comfortable answer. Who would do this? Some theories suggest conflicts between different groups using the trails. Others point to individuals who may have been frustrated or angry about noise or activity in the area. But regardless of the reason, the result is the same. Someone took the time to set a trap, knowing exactly what could happen, and then left it there, waiting. Because unlike an animal encounter, this isn't unpredictable behavior, it's calculated, and that makes it far more dangerous. The screams no one could explain. One night, around 2 a man living near a wooded area recorded something that would leave people questioning what exactly happened that night. The sound started suddenly, loud enough to wake him, coming from deep within the forest behind his home. At first it was difficult to make out, but as the recording continued, the details became clearer. A voice, high-pitched, panicked. What sounded like a child. The sound echoed through the trees, repeating over and over, carrying across the area in a way that made it impossible to ignore. But that wasn't the only thing. Hidden beneath the latter voice was something else. Another voice, lower, less obvious, but still there, calling out, as if responding, as if searching. Combination created something deeply unsettling. It didn't sound like random noise. It sounded like an interaction, like something was happening, and it was happening in the middle of the night, in a place where no one should have been. The man who recorded it later explained that he checked for explanations, looked for news, searched for any report, because if something had happened out there, there was no confirmation of what it was, and no closure, just a recording, and a moment that no one could explain. The footsteps that stopped when he turned around. A man named Daniel, known for documenting his camping trips, was out in the woods filming what was supposed to be another routine experience. At first, everything followed the usual pattern. Walking through the forest, setting up camp, talking casually to the camera. Then something changed. While sitting down, he suddenly paused. Behind him, faint but clear, footsteps, not distant, not scattered, steady, close. He turned around immediately, and the moment he did, they stopped, completely. No movement, no follow-up sound, nothing to confirm what he had just heard. For a moment, it could have been dismissed, but then it happened again. This time, the footsteps were more noticeable, more deliberate, and once again, the second he reacted, they stopped, as if whatever was making them didn't want to be seen. That pattern repeated multiple times. Movement when he wasn't looking, silence when he was. By the time it happened for the third time, the situation had shifted from strange to genuinely unsettling. Because animals don't behave like that. They don't move in consistent, controlled patterns only to stop the exact moment they're noticed. And they don't repeat that behavior multiple times. Eventually, Daniel made a decision. He packed up and left. Not because he knew what was out there, but because he didn't. And sometimes, that's reason enough. Conclusion. The deeper you go into the wilderness, the more it changes. At first it feels quiet, peaceful, even safe. But these stories suggest something else entirely, because the danger out there isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's hidden in the dark. Sometimes it's watching from a distance. And sometimes it's something you'll never fully understand, which leaves one final thought. If you ever find yourself alone in the woods and something doesn't feel right, it might already be too late to ask why.
The file is now closed, but the story doesn't end here. If you dare to open more, stay with us. The 3am archive files. Let me know if you would like to watch any videos like this in the future, because I think it's a lot of fun, because some of these stories are interesting and scary, and just put them together well, I think they are still worth reading and still worth listening. So subscribe and like the video for more, and thanks for watching the video, and until I see you next time.